Hello, you're joining me today for a closer look at Papo's brand new for 2020 Giganotosaurus. Obviously these figures have been a little bit delayed with all that's going on in the world at the minute, but here they are finally. So yes, the pose of this figure, it's back in a sort of kangaroo pose, which could maybe excuse that Papo thought this was in a dynamic fighting position with another dinosaur, but obviously Giganotosaurus was not able to get into this position. And it's not just the pose of the figure, it's actually the proportions of it as well. The legs are way too long, the arms are way too long, the tail is far too short, the head's probably a little on the large side, and general details like that I'll go into a little bit more later on. And although it looks like it's in a tripod pose, what I will say is it's not. As you can see, I can tip the figure back here onto its tail. The tail is actually clear of the ground, but you won't ever have any trouble, at least with this figure, tipping over and falling off a shelf. That's certainly never going to happen. So no, it is a terrible Giganotosaurus. Proportions are way out, the pose is terrible, but it's a Papo, and basically it's all about the sculptural quality and the painting quality and just the production values, really. So let's take a closer look at the head. As you can see, it has an articulated jaw. It's quite stiff on mine, but that's a good thing. Ooh, there we go. It's got this lovely detail of the muscles at the sides of the mouth here. They're quite nicely done. Quite often companies just sort of put lines here and they don't look very realistic, but Papo really managed to get a sort of muscular, wet sort of look at the corner of the mouth there. And the teeth as well. These aren't hugely sharp or hard, but as you can see, they certainly give the impression that they are. Again, fantastic sculptural detail. And when you really get close to Papo figures, you can see that they're originally sculpted by hand. You can see that every scale is a little bit unique. And I've been watching Marco Cavasso's Marco Makes videos on YouTube recently. Subscribe to him if you haven't already. The sculptural process for doing these things by hand is really intricate and intriguing, so you've really got to take your hat off to Papo's sculptor. Looking inside the mouth, I'll turn her over here. You can see there's an absolute abundance of detail down the throat there and across the roof of the mouth. It's absolutely incredible. They really do go into a forensic amount of detail when they're sculpting their figures. It's a shame they don't go into the same amount of research for the anatomy and other aspects of the dinosaurs when they sculpt them. So it's pulled back, the head's pulled back in this very sort of odd, unlikely position. So we've got some nice wrinkles and folds down the neck. As you can see, the colours are very subtle. There's not really a lot of purple going on here. There is a slight sort of pinkish tinge to the beige, which makes up the general bulk of the colours. Well, you can see all these different subtle variations in the paint scheme. And what I will say is, if you're going to get Papo figures, get them in the earlier runs, because whilst the later runs still have very high quality paint schemes, they're not up to the standard of the earlier runs. And this is just absolutely exquisite. You can see the eye, bright yellow, then it's brown around the pupil. Very well printed. There's a slight misprint on mine, as you can see. It bleeds a bit underneath the actual eye itself, but it's only a minor fault. And look how tiny the scale details are around the nostrils. So they really do kind of get a handle on making their models look like a little living animal, because they're hand sculpted and because everything's a little bit unique. Again, beautiful skin detail on this side. It is their usual standards. You can see that they've put larger, more robust scales everywhere where the dinosaur would be more bony, and they've put much smaller detailing in the finestry, which of course are shrink wrapped as per Papo's usual standards, but again, it's a Papo, so I'm not going to worry too much about that. The overall shape of the skull is off. Of course, it doesn't look that much like a Giganotosaurus. It's got the basic features, but doesn't really match the anatomical detail. But they have at least flattened off the maxilla a bit here, as per current research, so we'll give them that. So just moving down the body. I'm filming in this ratio today because this is a long and tall figure. It's difficult to film it in any other way. As you can see, the hands are beautifully done. Very fine scales along the knuckles here. Beautiful sharp claw detail. Different tones of paint on the claws. Absolutely remarkable, really. There's very, very few seam lines. You can see a minor one around the shoulder here. And again, this very sort of elephantine, hand-sculpted looking skin Of course, they've gone for putting little osteoderms in the skin, which would be way above scale if this was to scale, say, with a human figure. And there's detailing like that on the underside as well. Of course, it's got these big scales down the underside, which are way out of scale. I mean, if you had a human being standing next to this, they'd be the size of an A3 sheet of paper or something. So they're out of scale, but they're not overly scored or overly textured or anything like that. Again, this is another thing that Papo do. But to be honest, most toy companies, if they did sculpt the dinosaurs at scale, the figures would look totally flat and be quite bland. So it's quite nice that you do see a little bit of detail in that, even if it's not particularly realistic. Nicely sculpted hands, as you can see, the palms of the hands. And they always put all these sort of lines and folds in the skin to give the impression of movement. This is quite a dynamic pose. Like I say, it's a shame that it's not a pose that Giganotosaurus could actually get into. You see the length of the hind limbs here is way above where it should be. They've sculpted these nice rugosities around the knees. Of course, the legs are totally splayed out like a lizard's as well. And again, similar attention to detail, quality in the paintwork all the way down. They straddle that weird line between being a bit old-fashioned and being a bit sort of contemporary. So there are some retro figures of dinosaurs coming out, and if you want a retro dinosaur, you'd probably be better off going for one of those than one of these. But this is undoubtedly an incredibly high quality figure. Beautifully done, beautifully painted. You can see all the subtle tones and the stripes in the paint there. It's much more naturalistic than it looked in the promotional images. Again, these little osteoderms down the tails. Nice ridge along the back. The back's not too bad a shape, but of course it's forced into an unnatural position. Muscular calves as usual. And these very sort of bird-like scoots around the feet, which of course are oversized and out of scale as well, but beautifully sculpted, and as I say, hand sculpted, which makes them all the more impressive in some ways. There's even sculptural detail on the underside of the feet. You can see the pads are spread out as if it's really bearing the weight of the creature. So you can tell who sculpts these really understands animals. They just clearly don't understand dinosaurs very well, and I don't know if it's perhaps Papo's policy that, you know, dinosaurs need to look like monsters, which is a bit of a shame. Base of the tail, apart from the fact the tail's too short, could definitely do with being a bit thicker here. And of course it's flexed in a way that was not really possible for this animal, being a tetanurine. So overall, it's a massive disappointment that they didn't give us the Giganotosaurus that we wanted, but at the same time there's a lot to be said for it in terms of the quality of the paintwork, the robustness of the figure, the sheer forensic amount of detail that's gone into the sculpt and then into the factory paint job. It's very, very impressive. So yeah, it's going to look good on the shelf. It's not a Giganotosaurus. This is a Giganotosaurus, and to my eye, this, which looks more like an actual living animal and the scales and things are to scale, is a far more impressive figure. This, of course, is Eofaunus Giganotosaurus. Safari Limited also do a fabulous one, where the only difference is the tail base perhaps isn't as thick, but it's also an excellent replica. And W Dragon 2 have a Giganotosaurus coming out, and I'm actually quite interested in picking that one up. That might be my last blowout for a while, because unfortunately COVID-19 has killed my job. I'm just going to give you a size comparison with Papo's own Acrocanthosaurus, which is similarly afflicted with a very strange pose and wonky proportions, but again, it's another beautiful sculpt. So Papo, very high quality, excellent sculpts, terrible dinosaurs. I love them. I hope you've enjoyed having a look at this figure with me, and if you were a bit undecided, or if you just wanted to have a closer look out of sheer curiosity value, I hope this has helped you decide, and I shall see you in the next video.